so that we can post it everywhere after. And we'll have some of our members join us tonight, which is wonderful. Anybody who is on the call, feel free to ask your question live if you like, or you can always put it in the chat window and I'll make sure that that I asked Jocelyn the question. If you want to pop into the chat window and tell us where you're calling in from, that's always really interesting and exciting. We all read your book this month. So that was, I love literary fiction, so I was very excited about it. And yeah, we got some really great reviews back from some of the chapters. They all discussed it within the month of July at some point or another. So yeah. All right. Sorry, June. They discussed it in June. So Joselyn Takacs is a fiction writer and teacher based in Portland, Oregon. She grew up in Virginia Beach and holds a BA in creative writing, French and film studio studies from Virginia Tech, an MFA in fiction from Johns Hopkins University, and a PhD in creative writing and literature from the University of Southern California. So you're extremely qualified to write.
I spent a long time in school hiding out.
Takacs lived in New Orleans during the 2010 BP oil spill and in 2015 received a grant to record the oral histories of Louisiana oyster farmers in its aftermath. Research that became the foundation of her debut novel, Pearce Oysters, named a 2024 Best Book of a Summer by Elle and the New York Post. Her short fiction has appeared in Gulf Coast, Narrative, Tin House Online, Harvard Review, The Rumpus, and Diagram. And she was named one of Narratives Magazine's top writers under 30. So I'm going to now hand it over to you. And if there's anything that didn't cover that you want to tell us about yourself or about your experience writing or how you got into it or what you did before, anything like that, please feel free.
Oh, sure. Well, thanks again for having me. Those are the broad strokes of, my education. But writing a book is an education in itself, and I learned how to write a novel while working on this one, which took me 1,000,001 years to write. It's like 9 years from inkling to publication. So it was a long journey. Um, and as you said, my bio, I got the seed of this novel from my time in New Orleans when the spill was happening there. But I sort of went away with that germ and came back and knew I had to do my research before I could properly write about it. Um, and so that was a trip and journey in itself.
So were you going to school the whole time that this was like germinating, or you were actually working on it at the same time as going to school?
Um, Sort of. So after I moved to New Orleans after college because I was aimless and I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't quite know how. So I was waiting tables in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and then the BP oil spill happened. And at that time, I was writing short stories and just sort of learning my craft, and they weren't very good. And I got into graduate school and moved to Baltimore, and just needed to um, spend some time like figuring out what a story was and how to approach storytelling. I grew up as a reader, but I had to learn about my voice over the years. And then at the end of my time in Baltimore was when I realized that I wanted to write about the fallout of the BP oil spill because a few years had passed and the spill was fading from the national headlines. It was all over the news, as I'm sure many of you remember when it first happened. But over time, we move on from disasters, but ecological disasters are slow. And so I was sort of keeping my eye on the news about the fallout from the spill over the years.
Now, I'm just curious. You said something that those first short stories you wrote were terrible. Have you actually gone back and read them recently, or do you just remember them as being terrible?
They might, it's my ungenerous memory of them.
Okay.
I think I need like a stiff drink to go back and read some of them. But writing is learning. I'm learning now, and I'll look back on what I'm writing now and be a little bit embarrassed. I just feel like that's just kind of the writer's life.
For sure. Now, having spent so long writing this first novel, is this what you want to pursue, or is this like, do you think you'll be quicker, or is it like your dream to write like a novel a year, like some of the like really prolific no authors do?
Um, I think that would just be setting myself up for failure, a novel a year. But yeah, I'm working on my second book right now. And I'm like halfway through my first draft. It just is coming a lot more. I learned so much
Hmm.
while writing the first one, that I think it will be quicker from here on out.
So it will be quicker, but does it get easier?
I think, like each book, from the conversation I have with my writer friends, is like each book's its own puzzle, and you've got to learn how to solve each puzzle, um, on its own terms.
Nikki has a great question here for you. She says, excellent read to start with, but she wants to know if your publisher had to deal with any legal concerns or cautions when publishing a book about BP.
Yeah, we had a close reading from a lawyer, and I didn't expect that to be a part of the process, but was grateful for it. Um, because then I just felt that much more confident about the publication. And what the lawyer was reading for was, am I making any claims in about BP that could be contested in court, because they're not rooted in a character's opinion? And as you know from the novel, they're constantly talking about um, misdeeds by the company, but their opinions are all coming through characters and impressions of what's happening. So that is a workaround in the fiction world when you write something that's a bit a bit or very damaging towards a public company.
Sure. Um, so you were actually living in New Orleans when the spill happened, and how much of what's in the book comes directly from what you witnessed versus like what you would have later learned through your own research?
Um, there are parts of the book that take place in New Orleans in an activist community circle, um, and those were lifted. The setting, anyway, was lifted from my experiences during the spill. My friends and I organized a protest, much like the one that's in the novel. Um, But I wasn't on any oyster boats at the time. That came later.
Okay. And specifically, what drew you? Like, I know you spent time recording the oral histories of the farmers, but what drew you to that project?
Um, Initially it was a newspaper interview I read with an oyster farmer as the spill was happening, before I knew I was going to write about it. Um, and it was really in the middle of that summer. And the interview was taking place as the oyster farmer's business was shutting down.
Mm.
Um, And I just had no idea um, that there was such a vibrant and like storied oyster industry and tradition of family businesses
Sure.
in Louisiana raising oysters. And I just was really moved and thought it was such a tragedy what was happening to this man's oyster business. And um, I wasn't actively thinking about it over the years, but when I knew I wanted to write about it, that interview in particular um, popped up in my mind.
And somebody, this is a good segue to a question that somebody actually emailed me. They said Jordan and Benny represent two very different responses to inheriting a family legacy, one who stays and one who leaves. Did you know from the start how their relationship would resolve, or did that shift as you wrote?
Yeah, that was something I just kind of discovered as I was writing, which is how I approached plot with this novel. Um, Overall was just sort of learning the characters through writing, and I found out that they were sort of two sides of the same coin. The way that siblings can, be opposites and yet be like yet be like somehow from the same household. And I knew that getting them on the same boat together would generate tension and could move the story forward and could bring a character like Jordan, who was really inward, um, out of his shell in a way that I needed him to be in order to explore that oyster business.
And I was gonna ask you a question about yourself. Do you have any siblings?
I do. Yeah, I've got an older brother. He's 2 years older.
Okay. So did you draw from any of your own sort of like sibling experiences?
Yeah, I think yeah, your family always ends up in there. I'm also quite different from my brother. I think he got a kick out of reading the book. Um, though, we're not Jordan and Benny.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, there were aspects of our family dynamic in the Pearce family. My family, I grew up in Virginia, is politically skews right, and those weren't my politics, and so that was a source of conflict when I was, growing up. Um, and I just thought I would explore that in a novel as well.
While we're talking about characters, May's grief and depression are handled, I found with a lot of care in the book. What was important to you in getting her character right?
May was kind of a breath of fresh air for me to write in the book. Her sections were the easiest to write. Um, yeah, her voice was just kind of clear. When a character comes to you, sometimes you've got to sort of dig at them and be like, okay, but what do you really care about? And May was just clear to me from the beginning. And she really is the heart of that family. And so I don't think I needed to like quite approach it with care. It was one of the more natural elements of the book for me.
And the oyster industry is so specific, and there's actually very little written about it in fiction, which is not that surprising. But given that, what was the research process like for getting sort of like those details of that world like really correct? I know you talked about being on a boat, but tell us a little bit about what that looked like.
Yeah, I did that oral history project that you mentioned, and so I wanted to get a sense of what oyster farming was like in different parts of Louisiana, and also how oyster farms were affected in different parts. And so I traveled a lot across the state to record interviews and talk to as many folks as I could. I also talked to an oyster biologist um, and I really love oral history as a means of research because it's so much more vivid than reading an academic report about like the oyster life cycle. And I did try, there was a lot in the first draft of this novel that was like, here's about oyster reproduction. And like at one time, the oyster actually has a foot. Isn't that interesting? And my thesis advisor just said, you've got to get rid of this. This is so dull. Um, we're interested in this family and interested in oysters so far as they care about their business. And so the second draft was really sort of bringing the family story more to the fore, and letting the research drop away a bit.
So the book was your thesis for your PhD.
Yeah.
Okay, but then you go into the book world with it. Like what is that kind of like I don't know that I've ever talked to an author whose book was their PhD, and I'm sure that it's a different experience, right? Like presenting or defending your PhD and then taking it in because Zibby Publishing publishes your book. But
Mhm.
did they just take the final like thesis and publish that, or do you have to do things to it?
No, I went out on the market with the novel, and actually, after I defended it, uh, despite getting my degree, I thought it needed work.
Okay.
So I took another year and just kept working on it, and then went out with a different version. So, there is like an earlier draft of this that's in USC's digital library,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
um, that is a lesser version of this novel. But
Lesser, but is it longer?
yeah, it probably is a bit longer. I haven't.
I always feel like publishers are always saying you need to be more concise.
They absolutely are. There was a lot of cuts,
Yeah,
and the novel's better off for it.
sure. Well, we're missing the foot from the oyster, but that's okay. All right. So the book has been described as balancing the intimate and the global, which it surely does. One family story set against a massive environmental catastrophe. How did you find that balance without letting one overwhelm the other?
Um, I think it really came out in the drafting revision, because there's three main perspectives in the novel. You've got the two brothers and the mother, and then as I was revising, I knew that each story had to have its own little climax right around the same moment in time. And so that meant moving sections around, um, to align sort of the character arcs. Um, and that sort of revealed what can fall away.
I have a question that's sort of off topic, where not really character based, but having such a rich like kind of education in writing, does that make you feel like you'll only ever write like literary fiction, or could you go to like chick lit or something like romance, or like what are your feelings about that?
I think we're all versatile, right? Like the last thing that I wrote actually was a comedic uh, screenplay with my husband. We wrote well, I guess a dramatic comedy last year. It was our first screenplay, and it was a lot of fun. And I think you need palate cleansers in your
Yeah,
work.
yeah, I like that. Amazing. Okay, so you've said that the small rebellions of ordinary people in the face of larger upheavals are central to this book. Are there any stories or communities or events that you're drawn to writing about for those same reasons?
You mean in future works?
Yeah, in future works or even anything you're working on now.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm always interested in like what's been overlooked. I'm
Hmm.
interested in, who's doing the work, and who gets credit for work. I'm interested a lot in power, and like stories we tell about events and also big events, how they affect, you know, small units of people. I think, and it's just because, as a human, you just want to make sense of your own life. And that's at least speaking from my own like, worldview, like those are the kind of things that I like to explore.
Um, this is your debut novel after years of writing short fiction. Do you
Mhm.
prefer the short, or do you prefer this? Do you prefer the like a novel length?
I like it all, I just think that each story's got its own form. My next book idea sort of came to me when I was reading a memoir, and I thought, oh yeah, um, that's definitely a new novel. But then my husband and I were on a car drive in Oregon, and we were just talking about a podcast we just heard, and we thought, oh yeah, that would be a great film. So I think that you just need to be open to um, the stories that come to you and give them the space to tell them in whatever form is like most natural.
Is your husband a writer?
Yeah, he's a well, a short story writer, and he's working on his first book.
Oh,
We
that's
met
exciting.
in graduate school. Yeah. Yeah.
Two
His name is
authors.
two authors under one roof,
Yeah.
writing partners. It's a good thing to have an in-house editor.
I was gonna say, is he your first reader?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Much abused.
Very good. So I have another question about the book. So what do you hope readers, especially those with no connection to the Gulf Coast or the oyster industry, take away from the Pierce's family's story?
You know, I hope everybody cares about the Pierces, but I also hope that it prompts some reflection about the fragility of marine ecosystems and how all life is connected.
Absolutely. And I know you're published with Zibby, and we read another Zibby book actually recently. And I know that how has that experience been with Zibby publishing? Because I know that all the authors, I mean, she mostly publishes women. She has a couple men,
Yeah.
but I feel like you're all tight. You all know each other, and you all like go to events together. And
Yeah, and it's absolutely unique in that way
yeah,
because they acquired my book just as they were starting to publish their first titles. And so we had, these conferences where everyone from every author was brought in to meet and get to know one another, which is just not something that's done
yeah.
at other houses. And this is the luxury of being a new house. And so that was so wonderful. And I have new friends because of it. Yeah, that's just a dream.
And you're all like cheerleaders, and you show up for one another. It's really nice,
Yeah, absolutely.
especially as a debut. I mean, she publishes a lot of debut authors, which is lovely.
hmm We all need to break in.
Absolutely. So, can you tell us what you're working on now?
Yeah, the broad strokes of it's a historical fiction set in the desert of California as a couple is making their first movie together.
And is this based on the fact that you just wrote a screenplay with your husband?
Actually, no, no, this
Okay.
is just I really am interested in like 1970s cinema because
Okay,
that's kind of my nerd love and it's just going back and reading about that moment in time.
cool. Um,
Yeah.
so now I'm going to really put you on the spot and ask you if two questions. One is any books you love or just like always go back to or reread or anything you
hmm
recommend just from like your heart of hearts. And then the other
hmm
question is, have you read any arcs or anything that's recently published or anything that's coming that's exciting that we should know about? We love author recommendations.
Um, yeah, two things jump out. Black Swans by Eve Babbitt, an LA writer. It's very funny. Um, Short stories, mostly told in the first person. There's like a lot of scandal and gossip, and it's just a great voice to spend time with. I'm also currently listening to the White Album by Joan Didion, and I'm learning so much from her. like succinct descriptions of that moment in history, which is so good.
Hmm.
And then a contemporary writer would be Tessa Hadley. I'm a big fan of Tessa Hadley. Um, her the novel I read most recently by her was called Late in the Day. It's a beautiful novel. I
I'm
really
putting
recommend
all
that
of
one.
these in the chat for anybody who wants to, and I wrote Eve's last name wrong, but I corrected it below. For anybody who wants to check those out. Amazing. I will look into those. I am listening to, I wonder if you've heard, if you've, I'm just listening to it. Strangers by
Oh yeah, I've heard of
Belle
it.
Burden. Have you haven't?
Are you enjoying it?
Oh, it's intense. Yeah. And I think it's crazy because it's a memoir. So I like to listen to memoirs.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's really good. And I just finished The Correspondence by Victoria, is that her name? Maybe. It's like huge. Everybody's talking about it as well.
I've seen the cover, but I haven't read it.
Okay. Virginia Evans, I want to say, is the author there. Yeah, it's very good. And the book we read, Julie Chavez, Everyone But Myself, we read that last month. Who in that?
Julie's the best. I'm sure
Yeah.
she was great company.
Yeah.
She's like the lead organizer of the Zibby
Having
Books
read her
tour.
book, that does not surprise me. Amazing. Well, Jocelyn, that is all the questions I have for you. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. We'll make sure that this finds a home on our website. And thank you so much for writing such an insightful book, an important book. And we look forward to whatever is coming from you next. We'll be really excited to promote that as well.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me again and for reading Pierce Oysters. Such a pleasure to chat with you.
Awesome. Good night, everybody.